So give us an update. Last time we talked to you, you were selling these GLP-1s, these compounded versions of them, and you said there was a lot of appetite for them. Yeah, let me have a sense of two things. One is, how much of your business now are these GLP-1, the compounds, number one? And number two, at what rate is that growing in your business?
Yeah, first, thanks for having me on. The demand is, as you alluded to, has been incredible and I think unprecedented across the entire healthcare industry. Ro does offer both branded options and cash pay compounded options. We offer insurance options, and we do really pursue whatever is best for the patient. Right now, the minority of our business are these compounded medications. That does ebb and flow depending on the shortage and what a patient's personal sort of preference is, their insurance coverage in the current situation. It is one of the fastest growing categories, which I don't think comes as a surprise. But right now, it's been about consistently adding more and more options for patients. So when we started, we just offered Ozempic and Wegovy, and we added Zepbound, which is tirzepatide, or otherwise known as Mounjaro. And since we added compounded semaglutide, and we'll continue to add more and more options to expand the formulary to increase access for patients.
I want to talk a little bit more about the compounded GLP-1 market. When you think about the industry overall, I mean, how big is it in terms of dollar terms, in your view?
It's hard to say the exact dollar terms. What's really interesting to me about the compounded market in general is semaglutide is getting a lot of attention right now. But compounding during a shortage is actually the market functioning exactly as it's intended, right? So the FDA has spoken very publicly about the public health challenges when there is a brittle supply chain and there are drug shortages, right? And it's a lot of reasons behind some of the implementations of the FDA Safety and Innovation Act was to give the agency sort of a greater purview over drug shortages and protect the supply chain for patients. And so right now, what we're seeing is actually the market responding to ensure that patients have access to treatment, right? Providers aren't relying on second-line therapies. Patients don't miss doses when there isn't a drug available. And right now, there's shortages for cancer drugs, for diabetes drugs, for obesity drugs, which we are now learning are far more than just obesity drugs. I think the higher level question that I think people are going to have related to compounded drugs really is about the quality, right? Because to your point, they are not FDA approved. But what Ro really focuses on is Ro exclusively works with registered and inspected pharmacies. And prior to every single batch being sent to a patient is actually rigorously tested by a third party. So from initial instantiation all the way to sort of fill and finish of that vial, it's been tested by third parties prior to it being sent into a patient. And overall, what's fascinating is when Ro first started, right, when we started with ED treatment and Viagra, there was a lot of illegal counterfeit medications sold online, particularly for ED, and you saw those weird ads follow you around on the internet all the time. And the best disinfectant was sunlight. It was quality. And we think that there's a similar opportunity here, which is we invest in an incredibly high quality experience, which is why we've invested and partnered only with certain pharmacies that are registered and inspected and every batch is tested. So it's hard to say the exact sort of market size of compounded overall. I do think it is much larger than people originally anticipated, but I think that that's because people have dramatically underestimated the demand for these products. They underestimate, the majority of the US population has overweight or has obesity. I think people underestimate the severity of the pain point for people that are impacted. And then I think people have started to realize, but have historically underestimated the cascading impact of the drugs, right? They aren't just obesity drugs. They aren't just diabetes drugs. They aren't just drugs for cardiovascular disease. So the label is expanding. The efficacy of these drugs are increasing. The society's view of them is evolving, and that will only increase demand. And supply will have a harder time keeping up because I do think demand is growing much faster than supply. And so that mismatch will continue to exist, which is why outlets like compounding are so important for these medications.
Zach, as you know, some people have raised questions about the safety of these compounded drugs. I understand the FDA has to regulate the manufacturing process, but they have not approved the ultimate drug themselves. In your experience at Ro, have there been any safety issues reported?
So fortunately, one of the great features of Ro's platform is the ability to deliver really high quality at scale and have consistent touch points with patients and rigorously monitor from a data perspective in a very structured way our entire patient population. So when a patient comes on and they go through their online visits, they can, not only can they message their provider 24/7 and they can have video calls and phone calls at their discretion, but also we require check-ins at specific cadences determined by their provider and are able to measure in a very, very structured way across millions of patients across the platform, one in every single county across the US, we're able to measure their progress from both a weight loss perspective and a side effect perspective. So a patient right now can come on and do what we refer to as they can report a side effect. And when they report a side effect, they're actually reporting what side effect they're experiencing, the severity, the duration, any other associated side effects. And they're doing that, again, in a very, very structured way so that not only can we automate alerts and respond in real time and automatically create structured tasks for a healthcare provider to review and provide counseling, but it provides us the really great opportunity of doing exactly what you're saying, which is to ensure that regardless of the treatment that a patient is on, that there's no deviation or unexpected or atypical side effects. And so what we have been able to see is a very consistent, both from an efficacy perspective as well as a side effect perspective, we've been able to see consistency across branded and compounded medication, again, which goes to the investments in quality that we've made, right? Every single batch prior to being sent to a patient is actually sent to a third party. And among many other things, it's tested for sterility, for potency, for pH balance, for endotoxins, among many other things. And so for us, investing in that quality to ensure that experience is something that we've been able to do with our technology platform.
Well, Zach, when it comes to compounding, you mentioned a few minutes ago that, of course, you think about Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk and their products, they're in a shortage. They can't make enough of these drugs to actually meet the demand. And when it comes to your own business, when that's no longer the case, when we don't have this supply shortage, what does that mean for your business? Is that sustainable?
Overall, Ro is excited by the idea of a shortage ending, right? Shortages are not great for the healthcare system in general. They not only highlight the brittle supply chain that our pharmaceutical industry has right now, but it's also most importantly, it's a really bad experience for patients, right? Right now, when you have demand for these branded drugs that is greater than supply, and you unfortunately don't have typical inventory management systems and sort of a FIFO system that exists with all other in-demand products, right? With every other industry and any other in-demand product, take an iPhone, you put yourself on a list and you get that iPhone, and you can continue to get that product, and people just move off of that wait list. The way that our system is set up right now is that it's a fight for patients every single month, right? So if there's 5 million doses available and 7 million patients that have a prescription, that mismatch, as long as there is more demand than there is supply, will continue every single month. And so for us, if supply increases to the point where patients are able to seamlessly access their medication, that is overall a good thing for Ro. Ro's business is aligned with our patients. The more affordable access that they have, and more continued seamless access, the better. We started actually by offering branded medication that were covered by insurance, right? So when you think about the current insurance options versus compounded, compounded is a great option for patients during certain situations, but there are many instances where a branded option is better for a patient, even from a cost perspective, right? We often talk about the cost of these drugs, $1,000, $1,500 a month, but there are 50 million Americans in the US that are covered for Wegovy. And the majority of them, and we see this on our platform, the majority of them pay less than $100 for their copay. And so the idea, and when you think about the number of pens that are available, right, let's even just say and you can run the numbers and we can talk about that if you'd like, but there's probably enough drugs for about 5 million people, enough doses on the Wegovy side, roughly. And again, plus or minus there.
Right.
There are 10 times the number of people that are covered where their copay is less than $100. And so the amount of demand that exists, the latent demand that exists, is so significant. We don't anticipate, and I think it would be hard for anyone to anticipate production increasing 10 times over the next 5 years. So I do think that this shortage will last longer than people think. But overall, the more that it ends with more competition like Lilly coming in, Amgen, there's 118 drugs in the pipeline. The more competition, the better for patients, and the fewer shortages, the better for patients. So that is better for Ro's business when patients have a better experience.